Hi, it's Dr. Isom, and I am here to talk to you about personality judgment. In this lecture, I'm going to cover a couple of things. First, an overview of personality judgment, who does it, when they do it, and some relevant research in the area. Later, I will talk about the 4 moderators of accuracy and the realistic accuracy model that can be used in an effort to make judgments of personality more accurate. Personality judgment. We all do it. We all do it all the time. And people are constantly judging our own personalities as well. Some of the things that you might have encountered are trying to figure out if a person would be a good match for you as a roommate. It's crucial that whoever you choose to live with, you get along with well. Otherwise, that can be a really tough living situation. Another example is teachers. They can make a prejudgment of somebody as being gifted or not, and that can influence the way that they treat that student, which can then have an impact on that student's ability to learn. How about when you meet somebody new? An assessment of that person's personality is something that happens when you're trying to figure out if this new person is someone that you might be interested in dating or having a deeper relationship with. And don't forget, it's election season, and as much as we'd all like to believe we're really evaluating candidates on their merits and their policies and their record, research suggests no, we may be actually voting on their personality characteristics. I'll talk a little bit more about that research later. When someone is being tried for a criminal case, the jury is evaluating the evidence, but they're also evaluating the personality of that defendant. Are they the type of person who would have engaged in that criminal behavior or not? When you apply for a job, that job interview, that is a big personality judgment. They're trying to figure out whether your personality, your skills, your abilities are a good fit with their organization. And anytime you ask for a letter of recommendation from a professor or from someone else for graduate school, that is a whole page letter that's a judgment of you, and more specifically, your personality. What's really important to know then, with all of these things at stake, is whether our judgments of other people and whether the judgments other people make of us are correct. How do we know that? When we're talking about a formal personality assessment, then we can investigate whether the assessment was done with a valid test by someone who's qualified to do that kind of personality assessment. So when we're talking about formal assessment or formal judgment of personality, we can be assured that we have a valid assessment to the extent that we've used a valid and reliable test. But we don't have that when we're informally judging other people's personalities. What we talk about then is whether our judgment is accurate or not, whether it is a true representation of that target personality traits. So instead of asking if a personality judgment is valid, we ask whether it is an accurate personality judgment. And how do we do that? Well, there are 2 basic criteria that can be used to evaluate whether any judgment is accurate or not, and that is whether or not other people agree with that judgment. So if you have inter-judge agreement, which essentially means other judges also agree on your assessment of a target's personality, and then also whether a personality judgment correctly predicted that target's behavior. Here's a really practical example of how these 2 basic criteria, agreement and prediction, are being used to increase the accuracy of personality judgments for prospective graduate students. After test scores and grades, the reason why you are accepted or not to graduate school really comes down to a personality judgment. And they have to base those judgments on letters of recommendation. The reason why graduate schools want more than one letter of recommendation is because they know that if more than one professor or mentor agree that a student has the ability and the motivation to be successful in graduate school, that increases the accuracy of those judgments. Second, the whole reason they ask for those letters at all is because they've been shown to predict success in graduate school. So graduate programs rely on those 2 basic criteria, agreement or inter-judge agreement and prediction, to increase the accuracy of those personality judgments that determine who gets accepted to graduate school. Other people's judgments of your personality characteristics, such as the content of your letter of recommendation, can be thought of as your reputation. Our judgment of others' personality characteristics can also be thought of as their reputation. And because your reputation can have a big impact on what happens in your life, it's important that it be accurate, because it can impact your opportunities, the things that you may want to engage in, like getting a job with a certain employer, or, as I mentioned before, friendships, romantic relationships, or getting into graduate school. So you can see how important it is that the judgments we make of other people and that other people make of us are as accurate as possible. Unfortunately, the reputation of some people is inaccurate. For example, often people who score low in extroversion, who might be called shy, are unfortunately misperceived as cold or distant or even aloof because they don't engage in a lot of social interaction. It's not because they don't want to, it's just very tough for them. And so some of the behaviors that they might engage in, trying not to be caught up in a large social gathering because of, the discomfort that happens, can sometimes be misread from other people as trying to avoid them. And so unfortunately what happens is it ends up just reinforcing their shyness. Another reason why other people's judgments of your personality should be as accurate as possible is because it creates something called expectancy effects, or expectations for how you're going to behave in the future. Once people feel they have a sense of who you are and a good judgment of your personality, most people feel like they can predict your future behavior from that past behavior. This is a type of expectancy effect. Let's talk about those. There are two main kinds that are mentioned in this chapter, and one of them is intellectual expectancy effects. There's a famous study from the 60s. It's Rosenthal and Jacobson. This is the study where they picked a number of students out at random, and they didn't tell the students, but they told the teachers of those students at the beginning of the school year that those were really super bright, intellectually capable kids, and their IQ was much higher than the rest of the class. And what happened at the end of the year is that even though those students were intellectually no different from the other students, they did score higher on IQ tests. They did perform more highly in the classes. So Rosenthal and Jacobson concluded that what the teacher believed they could do came true. And it wasn't because the kids necessarily made that happen. They attributed that to the way the teachers treated the, quote, intellectually gifted, unquote, kids differently compared to the kids that they didn't believe were intellectually gifted, so that it increased their performance. And they created a model for this intellectual expectancy effect that includes the following aspects. First, the teachers created a climate for those particular students that was more conducive to learning, more resources available, perhaps a more stimulating environment. They also provided them with more feedback. Feedback is really important to know what you've learned so far that's correct and what you need to do to better master a concept. They also increased their input. They created more opportunities for the kids to learn and presented them with more information in order to develop their skills and knowledge. And then the last thing was output. They provided more opportunities for those students to show what they had learned. So in this way, Rosenthal and Jacobson were arguing that teachers' expectations can have a huge impact on the actual performance of the students, even when students are not aware of those expectations. The other kind of expectancy effect is social expectancy effects. And there's a particular study in the textbook that illustrates this. That is the study where they had undergraduate males just chat on the phone with a stranger undergraduate female, and they either led them to believe that the females were very attractive or were rated as unattractive. The interesting finding in this study was if the man believed that the woman he was talking to was attractive, the woman was more likely to have behaved in a manner rated as warm, humorous, and poised than when the male believed he was talking to an unattractive woman. In other words, the male's belief in whether or not the female was attractive or unattractive caused her to respond in a way that was consistent with his expectations. One of the things that Snyder concluded was that this is kind of like the self-fulfilling prophecy, where attractive women are thought to be warm and friendly, and so they're treated that way. And then what ends up happening is they end up responding in that warm and friendly and poised manner, reinforcing that self-fulfilling prophecy. So these are just two examples of experimentally induced expectancy effects, but what about in real life? Do expectancy effects really happen? There is research to suggest that expectancy effects, like self-fulfilling prophecies, do happen. Those self-fulfilling prophecies can either stem from our own beliefs about our behavior or other people's beliefs about our behavior. Our own expectations of ourselves really do dictate our successes and our failures. There's a really great quote by the author Richard Bach in which he says, "Argue strongly for your limitations, and surely they're yours." We do determine the limits of our success. Those limits are based on our beliefs about ourselves and what we can accomplish. Here's an example of how a self-fulfilling prophecy might work. Take, for example, the person who is chronically late. After some time, they may actually start to believe that they're not capable of being on time. And this can lead to them no longer even taking steps to try and improve their tardiness, to change that behavior. And each time they arrive late, it confirms and reinforces those beliefs about not being able to be on time. So this is an example of how the beliefs about ourselves can reinforce and maintain those beliefs. Expectancy effects can also come from other people. Expectations of others can affect the way that we behave because sometimes those expectations actually end up eliciting the behaviors people are expecting us to engage in. Remember the Snyder study mentioned about the undergraduate males and females chatting on the phone? The extent to which the females chatting on the phone were warm, humorous, and poised was thought to be caused by the males' expectations of whether or not they were attractive. Here's a different example. If we have a coworker who we believe is just not very friendly and seems to always treat us abruptly and maybe rudely and seems to always be in a bad mood, that creates an expectancy or a self-fulfilling prophecy that no matter what we do, that person is going to treat us that way. What ends up happening is because we expect to be treated that way, we tend to treat them in a way that elicits those behaviors. We might be abrupt or rude with them. We might be short with them. We might tend to not give them the benefit of the doubt. And because of the way we treat them, sure enough, they respond in the manner that we expected them to, just confirming and reinforcing your beliefs about their personality. Going back to how important it is to be accurate when judging people's personalities, just want to mention a quick philosophical point. Research in this area really stalled for a while in personality research because the question became, can we really ever accurately judge a person's personality? Personality researchers were struggling with these two competing ideas. The first is constructivism. Constructivism implies that there really is no objective reality, and reality is just a construction that we all create in our own minds, including personality. My idea of your personality is not real. It's just my own social construction. And your idea of your personality is not real either. It's just your social construction. We can't compare our own realities because they're not comparable. And if there is no objective reality, then there's no way to know who is more accurate. The other philosophical viewpoint is critical realism. And the idea behind this is that not everybody's view of reality is equally valid, and there are some things that people can agree on. Even if we don't have perfect criteria to determine what's truth and what's not, that doesn't mean that it's not possible to gather all the information that we possibly can to help us determine whether a personality judgment is valid. And that is the view that personality psychologists went with. So, if we assume the critical realism view, then how do we know if our judgments of someone's personality are accurate, are correct? The way to do this is to show that your personality judgment is supported by convergent validation. In convergent validation, you look at different sources of information to see if they're giving you the same conclusion. In the case of a duck, If you're trying to figure out if something's a duck, well, you're going to listen to it. Does it quack? You're going to watch it walk. Does it waddle like a duck? And observe its behavior. Does it act like ducks usually act? If all those things seem to converge upon the common conclusion that this is a duck, then you've obtained convergent validation that this animal is indeed a duck. Or as Funder says, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck, it must be a duck. That's why he calls convergent validation the duck test, I think. And determining whether a personality judgment is accurate is a similar process. So you take different sources of information, and we know what these are, whether or not you have multiple raters who agree or multiple judges who agree, and whether or not that personality judgment is able to predict that person's behavior. To the extent that multiple people agree on a person's personality judgment, and to the extent that that judgment can predict that person's behavior, you have a valid and accurate judgment. When you compare those different sources of information and they seem to point to a similar conclusion about a person's personality, then you know that you have convergent validation. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it must be a duck. If two different personality judges agree that a target is an extrovert and that extrovert goes to a lot of parties with a lot of people, then you have convergent validation that that's probably an extrovert.